Namaste, and very happy to have you again on this course on Introduction to Indian Psychology. We are in the 11th week, nearing the end, and this week has been dedicated to looking at some illustrative cases, some living embodiments of the teachings of the yoga tradition as well as that of Indian psychology. So, we're looking at the stories of people who have gone through that in the recent centuries as well as those who are there currently also who would be talking of these qualities. So, I will take you on to the lecture overview. So, here's the lecture overview. In the previous week, we looked at the two stories of Sadashiva, Brahmendra Saraswati, their teachings, etc., and followed by Sri Ramana Maharshi, his life experience and the teachings that came out from there, mainly being Atma Vichara and Mauna in both cases. Today's session is going to be dedicated to two personalities from Bengal this time. The first two were from Tamil Nadu. These two are from Bengal. And they are a Guru Shishya couple that you are all very familiar with. It's a story of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and Swami Vivekananda. There will be an introduction where we look at the empirical mystic Sri Ramakrishna and his dynamic successor Swami Vivekananda. And in terms of the historical context, this is the 19th century Bengal Renaissance, where there's a crisis of faith and the psychological awakening of colonized India, followed by the core teachings. So, we look at the shift from Vijnana and the ripe ego that Sri Ramakrishna talks about to the psychology of strength that Swami Vivekananda represented. We look at the applications in Indian psychology. So, from the threshold state of Bhava Mukha to the active manifestation of man-making education. There are similarities with Western psychology, and these can be understood in terms of pragmatism, sublimation, positive psychology, and Bandura's self-efficacy model. So, then we'll end with exercises, glossary, references, and food for thought. Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa, he lived around 1836 to 1886. A little about him, he was the empirical mystic, born Gadadhara Chattopadhyay in 1836 and he lived on till 1886 in Kamarpukur, rural Bengal. He served as a priest at the Dakshineshwar Kali temple, completely devoid of formal academic or English education. And you see the similarity with Sri Ramana Maharshi as well. He undertook a staggering variety of psychological spiritual disciplines, Tantra, Vaishnavism, Advaita, Islam, Christianity. In fact, he is famously known to have walked all the paths of yoga that he could understand at that time, yoga and the different religions, in order to understand for himself what it meant to belong to those different identities and communities. And he had different observations in each case. So, he also treated each disciple as an empirical experiment, reaching the ultimate cognitive culmination of each path. He mastered the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which is a complete ego dissolution, but consciously rose to retain a slight purified ego to teach others. Famous story from his life, which is the cutting the form of the divine. So, in about 1864, the wandering monk Totapuri, he arrived to initiate Sri Ramakrishna into the highest formless state of Advaita Vedanta. Despite his vast spiritual mastery, Sri Ramakrishna's mind kept returning to his deeply cherished, comforting vision of Mother Kali. He could not completely collapse the subject-object relationships. So, Totapuri forcefully pressed a piece of glass into Ramakrishna's forehead and commanded him to concentrate there. Can you imagine that? So, the realization was that using his intellect like a sword, Ramakrishna cognitively cut through his most profound emotional attachment, which is the form of Kali, and instantly plunged into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which is a complete cessation of mental fluctuations for 3 days. And what was the impact? That he empirically proved that ultimate psychological liberation requires moving beyond even our most positive, deeply ingrained emotional attachments to reach absolute unconditioned awareness. And this is again very important, that Sabija Samadhi is when there is still an anchor on some object. It can be a Rishta Devata, it can be anything, but there is still an object which becomes the core of your practice. But then with Nirvikalpa Samadhi, There is Savikalpa and this is Nirvikalpa. So with Nirvikalpa Samadhi, he was able to even go beyond that. But he was such a big bhakta of the mother, Ma Kali. In fact, another story goes where he says that, if you don't show yourself to me, I'm going to cut my neck with the sickle that you hold. And that's when Ma Kali literally stops his hand and gives him darshan. Okay, so he was an illiterate person, but totally God intoxicated. Time and context. So he lived during the height of the 19th century Bengal Renaissance. This was a period that was defined by strict British rationalism, colonial education, and a deep crisis of cultural identity among the Indian youth. The Brahmo Samaj emerged as a hyper-rational reformist movement, often stripping away the experiential depths of tradition. And the intellectual youth were trapped between orthodox dogma and Western materialistic skepticism. So we see that both of these extremes were there. So on one side, you had these dogmatic ideas of tradition that were prevalent, and on the other side, you had this hyper-rational British way of looking at life. Sri Ramakrishna served as a living, undeniable proof of experiential psychology, converting brilliant skeptics like Narendranath Datta, who later on became Swami Vivekananda, through direct cognitive transmission. So here are his main teachings. He spoke of Vijnana and the plurality of paths. So one of his main ideas was Joto Moth Toto Poth. And this means that as many faiths, so many paths, recognizing that different human temperaments require entirely different cognitive therapies. He also spoke of the importance of jnana. This is the intellectual realization that the absolute alone is real. Vijnana. This is the mature integrated state of seeing that same absolute manifesting dynamically as the entire universe. In terms of renunciation, he spoke of freeing biological and cognitive bandwidth from the exhausting demands of lust and greed. Applications in Indian psychology. So he was talking about Bhava Mukha. What is Bhava Mukha? This is the threshold of consciousness. It is a psychological state that balances perfectly between the unconditioned absolute and the conditioned relative world. So it's like the link principle between the two. There is sublimation versus suppression. So instead of violently suppressing emotions, he taught sublimating them through bhakti. And the concept of the ripe ego versus the unripe ego. So he was very clear about the fact that there is a need for an ego, but one has to eventually go beyond that ego self and become the ripe ego by surrendering that also to the divine consciousness. And instead of trying to instantly destroy the deeply ingrained I, he taught about re-educating the I to identify as a servant, an instrument, or a child of the universe. So a lot of the bhakti bhava and the seva bhava through which one can again unite and connect to the divine consciousness. Similarities with Western psychology. So in Western psychological models, you have the ideas of pragmatism from William James, and this seems to be similar to Sri Ramakrishna's ideas of focusing on the transformative fruits of his cognitive states rather than arguing theology. Psychoanalytic sublimation. So this is about redirecting baseline libidinal energy towards higher unified cultural or spiritual expressions through bhakti. Transpersonal psychology. So there is a modeling state of consciousness that transcends the boundaries of the biographical ego. And finally, cognitive flexibility. So there is adopting different religious paradigms at will, demonstrating ultimate cognitive diffusion. So the last one is not at all easy to think that, you'll be able to practice every single path of religion or world thought in its own native spirit. So that was a big achievement, to be able to let go of all one's constructions and become dedicated to any one path, and as a very stringent observer, as a very strict observer on the path, see what happens to the individual when you follow a specific discipline and practice. So this is a kind of a table to show the similarities, but by no way is it exhaustive. And there is an invitation to delve deeper into such parallels, to find what is in common, what is different, how much is there in common and how much is there that is different, that Indian psychology then can contribute to the domain of psychology at large. List of important works. So the first one is Sri Sri Ramakrishna Kathamrita, and this is translated as the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, recorded meticulously by Mahendranath Gupta M. He used to be taking down the notes of what he was listening to Sri Ramakrishna talk about. So clinical precision, so this reads like a precise clinical transcript recording exact dates, times, behavioral observations and context. That's the text that we looked at. There were also therapeutic tools within it because it captures a brilliant use of humor, relatable parable and direct confrontation based on the listener's psyche. And then there's also another work called Sayings of Sri Ramakrishna. This is an exhaustive collection of his maxims demonstrating the contrast between intellectual clutter and pure realization. So what were some of his influences, national and international? So at a national level, he sparked the spiritual and cultural renaissance of modern India. His chief disciple was Swami Vivekananda, who founded the Ramakrishna Mutt and Mission, institutionalizing Loka Sangraha or universal welfare as the highest spiritual ideal and psychological duty. What's the international influence? He introduced the West to the experiential validity of Indian psychology via the 1893 Parliament of Religion, because he is the one who sent Swami Vivekananda there as a representative to stand up for Vedanta and tell the world what is essential about its thoughts. So he deeply influenced major Western intellectuals including Aldous Huxley, Romain Rolland, Joseph Campbell as well as Christopher Isherwood. He established the precedent that Eastern psychological mastery and Western rational science are perfectly compatible, and that's a very, very important idea that later scholars like Yogananda Paramahamsa and many others took up and expressed in their own ways in works like the Autobiography of a Yogi. Let's look at the exercise. So the context is that normally when one tries to overcome the ego, one tries to violently crush the ego, which often leads to psychological rebound and anxiety. So he says the first step is to identify a current stressor where your unripe ego is causing friction. For example, I must succeed at this project. I need them to respect my work, etc., which causes distress, as you can imagine. In step 2, you have to consciously shift the identity parameter from owner to instrument. In step 3, reframe the thought. I am merely an instrument doing this work to the best of my ability. The ultimate outcome belongs to the universe. So to be able to surrender the fruits of one's action to something that is higher. Then what is a reflection from here? So maybe in your diary again, you can write down how does shifting from the demanding unripe ego to the surrendered ripe ego immediately reduce biological tension and cognitive load. It's really worth pondering and experimenting with in terms of a first-person psychology. Swami Vivekananda, he lived between 1863 and 1902. So a little bit about him, he was the awakener, born as Narendranath Dotto in 1863 and lived up to 1902 in Calcutta. He was born to an aristocratic family. He possessed a fiery, analytical, skeptical mind that demanded empirical proof of higher states of consciousness. Very, very rational and very much like the mindset of today's world as well, where you want to see proof of everything. So he experienced profound cognitive shifts under the guidance of Sri Ramakrishna, eventually mastering deep meditative absorption. So the story goes that, he would go around to these realized people and ask him, have you seen God? Have you seen God? So when he came to Sri Ramakrishna and asked him that same question, Sri Ramakrishna just put his hand on his head and he had a complete sense of transformation there. There was like an electrifying experience he had. And Sri Ramakrishna told him simply that, I see God more realistically than I see you. So for him, Mother Kali was a very living entity, and that is what he was able to transmit and transfer as an experience to Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda also renounced personal isolation to become a wandering monk, actively absorbing the psychological and physical suffering of the Indian masses. So Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa actually sent him out on this journey to mingle with people, to understand what the sadhana is all about. He died at a very young age of 39, leaving behind a massive, globally influential psychological and spiritual legacy, which was the Sri Ramakrishna Mutt and other related institutions. famous story related to him, the transmission of the void. So during one of his early visits to Dakshineshwar, he was highly skeptical, and hyper-rational young Narendra was fiercely arguing against the concept of Advaita. So without any warning, Sri Ramakrishna just reached out and touched Narendra on his foot. Narendra instantly felt the walls of the room and his own rigid egoic identity spinning and dissolving into a terrifying, boundless void. This realization led him to cry out in panic, "What are you doing to me? I have parents at home." He realized that the intellectual self he thought he was could be completely, instantly dismantled by a higher state of consciousness. And then what was the impact of this? That it shattered Swami Vivekananda's intellectual arrogance. It proved to him with immediate somatic proof that higher states of consciousness are not mere philosophical concepts to be debated, but powerful transmittable realities that completely rewire human perception. And that is what is very important to take note about, that these ideas are not just some philosophical mumbo jumbo that you can just spend your leisure time discussing. This is about real experience, because that is knowledge which only leads to the liberation of the individual, say the Upanishads. Time and context. So he lived during the height of the British colonial rule, which had systematically eroded Indian self-esteem. The national psyche was characterized by tamas, lethargy or fatalism, and a crippling inferiority complex. Spirituality had largely degenerated into passive ritual or escapism from active duties. And in the West was simultaneously undergoing a crisis of meaning due to the Industrial Revolution and the materialistic science. So Swami Vivekananda diagnosed the root illness of his era not as political but as profoundly psychological, a loss of faith in the self. What are some of his main teachings? So he talked about practical Vedanta. He says you can't preach Vedanta to an empty stomach. So he talked about the fact that philosophy must not remain abstract. It must be lived dynamically in the marketplace and daily life. He also talked about Daridra Narayana, and this is God in the poor. So service is the highest form of cognitive worship for him, and ego dissolution. He also advocated Shraddha, which is an absolute uncompromising faith in one's own infinite psychological and spiritual potential. And finally, fearlessness or Abhi. Fear is the root of all psychopathology. Strength is the only true medicine. So there was also the famous story where he's being chased by a group of monkeys on the ghats of Varanasi, and he's also running. Suddenly he hears this voice of a very senior sadhaka who shouts that to him, saying that, "Turn and face the brutes." So it is when he turns and faces the brutes that they also run. So this is a very important key for many of us in our lives, that if we know how to turn and face our brutes, maybe many of them will just dissolve by the power of our courage to address them directly. Applications in Indian psychology, so education and character building. He formulated the concept of man-making education as the ultimate psychological tool for societal change, because it is that knowledge base that has to change. And that's why in today's context, we are re-looking at NEP and what the national education frameworks have to be, including topics like IKS, Indian Knowledge Systems. So he defined education not as the accumulation of facts, but as the manifestation of the perfection already in man. Okay, that's a very important idea, that this perfection is there, but it's all clouded and shrouded. So how do we uncover it? That is exclusively in our hands. So he emphasized brahmacharya, conservation of vital energy, to optimize cognitive bandwidth and concentration. So he says, especially till a certain age, especially the brahmacharya phase, it is better to focus one's energies on acquiring knowledge rather than filter it away in the distractions of trying to earn too much wealth or trying to have, sexuality and indulge in all those lower energy activities. So according to this, it is important to try and be focused and not allow oneself to get distracted by the pulls and pushes of the different forces in us. He also taught that curriculum should focus primarily on training the mind how to concentrate and how to detach rather than rote memorization. So what are some similarities with Western psychology? So we have the Bandura's self-efficacy model, where the equivalent could be Shraddha, the unwavering belief in one's own agency and infinite internal power to affect change. In terms of positive psychology of Seligman, the equivalence here is that of the rejection of the pathological original sin model. His absolute focus was on the human flourishing, inherent goodness and strength. So completely focused on the strengths of the individual, not of, whether you're born of sin or whatever past you might be carrying with you. So he also talks of William James' functionalism, where in Karma Yoga, he talks about the pragmatic application of mental states, testing truths by their functional utility in daily life. Existential psychology, so there is a confrontation of the fear of death and meaninglessness through the realization of the immortal Atman. Also, Swami Vivekananda also was very famous because he went and gave speeches in places like Harvard and many places after his famous Chicago's speech in Boston, where he talked to the Parliament of Religions, addressing them as sisters and brothers of America, which drew great applause. So what are some important works by him? He wrote on Raja Yoga. This is a highly technical manual translating Patanjali's aphorisms or the sutras into a modern psychological science of concentration. He then also wrote a work on Karma Yoga, and you see on each of the yogas, in fact, he has a work. So the Karma Yoga text looks into the cognitive mechanics of selfless action, how to work intensely in the world without egoic exhaustion or burnout, worth trying out. And then Jnana Yoga, which is a path of radical intellectual inquiry using sharp logical analysis to deconstruct the false limited ego. And finally, Bhakti Yoga. So this is the science of emotional sublimation, redirecting intense human passion towards an integrated, unifying ideal. What was his influence nationally and internationally? So at the national level, he electrified the Indian independence movement, and figures like Subhash Chandra Bose and Sri Aurobindo considered him the spiritual father of modern India. In fact, Sri Aurobindo, when he was in solitary confinement, he actually had visitations in the subtle body by Swami Vivekananda, who came and taught him a lot of things about yoga, sadhana, etc. So this shifted the entire cultural ethos from passive endurance to dynamic, confident action. At an international level, he stunned the West at the 1893 World's Parliament of Religions in Chicago, where single-handedly he introduced Vedanta to America. And as I mentioned earlier also, when he stood up to speak, he started with the words "Sisters and Brothers of America," and everybody gave him a thunderous applause. He became a close friend and intellectual peer of William James at Harvard. William James, the same psychologist that we've been talking about. So he became a close friend of his and deeply influenced the development of American pragmatism. And then he established the Ramakrishna Mission, institutionalizing his psychology of service worldwide. So one important idea is that they say that when he was in the US and he was invited to give several lectures in Harvard, some of the top intellectuals of that time were greatly influenced by what he had to say. And people like Tesla also had opportunities to discuss about the Vedantic perspective of cosmology and consciousness, etc. So we see that the influence of Vedanta, yoga spread very far and wide, with Swamiji being one of the earliest pioneers stepping into the West and promoting these ideas in that land. Exercise. So this is based on the real event where Swami Vivekananda was chased by a troop of the aggressive monkeys, which I already mentioned. And as he fled, the old monk yelled that "Face the brutes." And when he turned and faced them, the monkeys retreated. So the psychological principle here is that if you have anxiety and fear, and these would only multiply when the mind retreats or avoids the stresses. Therefore, step one for you is identify a current pressing psychological fear or avoidance behavior. So what is it that you're running away from? What is it that you're afraid to face? Second, stop cognitive avoidance. Mentally and physically turn around and face the stressor completely without flinching. So whatever it is that is stressing you out, have the courage to just turn around and face it and say, okay, let's head on. Go into it and resolve that problem. Finally, do the reflection exercise where you notice how the sheer act of turning your attention aggressively toward the fear instantly dissolves the panic response and restores executive function. Glossary for you: followed by some references. So finally, food for thought. Sri Ramakrishna says that only two kinds of people can attain self-knowledge. Those who are not encumbered at all with learning, that is to say, whose minds are not overcrowded with thoughts borrowed from others, and those who, after studying all the scriptures and sciences, have come to realize that they know nothing. All right. So, yeah, see where you find yourself on the spectrum. And then we have Swamiji who says that this life is short, the vanities of the world are transient, but they alone live who live for others. The rest are more dead than alive. So service, service, service was his call to humanity. And service because you do service to the God in the other. So for these few words, I will leave you to ponder upon what Sri Ramakrishna Thakur represented and also what Swami Vivekananda encouraged us to do, which was about practical Vedanta. It's not a retreat Vedanta, but in life, in action and in the service of others. Namaste.